Before I begin my talk, could I just indulge your mind for 1 second? Could I ask you to just think about your journey to this museum? Start with leaving home. Your physical journey, that is. My experience of education, in fact, my early experience in life was to be born into separateness. That picture was taken 2 minutes away from where I live. I belong to the Catholic community, and the other side belonged to the Protestant community. So I was born into separateness. We were not just separated physically, but we were also separated in education. So we had 2 different school systems. We then were further separated according to ability or disability, or learning ability or disability. So this is in Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, and my experience of education has had a lasting impact on me. It has kind of forced me as a professional educator to try and find an educational paradigm that is inclusive. In June 2016, I published a paper for the Farmington Institute in the University of Oxford, where I'm a research fellow, and it was in the area of religious education. The point of my research was to design a curricula that has inbuilt in it reconciliation. I am passionate about inclusion and about finding inclusive educational experiences for learners regardless of their background, regardless of their ability or disability. And to this end, I share my TED idea with you, which is that I believe that the universal design for learning is a paradigm for maximum inclusion. Now, this UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, has a context. It owes its origins to the study of architecture and an architect called Ronald Mace. He was both an architect and a wheelchair user. He challenged designers of his time to design the physical sphere, buildings, parks, and so forth, to meet the broad needs of as many users or service users as possible. Now, this was not easy for Ronald Mace, the architect and wheelchair user, because to be disabled in his time was seen as not normal. And because it wasn't normal, it didn't require any kind of design or any kind of building. Now, Mace challenged the designers of his time to conduct a thing called impact research, to discover who needs access to a building, a park, the roadway, and so forth, to design for diversity. And eventually, the design community, architecture came round to his way of thinking. Impact research is now across all industry. Universal design has now become the buzzword for inclusive design. Now, Universal Design for Learning, or I call it UDL, has as its guiding principles to assist educational practitioners, regardless of what position they play within the education process. Practitioners, assessors, but mostly curriculum designers or builders, to discover new ways, contextual ways of making the curriculum accessible, regardless of the background of the learner. I believe that UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is an effective and maximum paradigm for educational inclusion. That is, in the learning, teaching, assessing, and most importantly, in curriculum designing or building. Why? quite simply because it is learner-centered. Now, my educational experience, both personally and professionally, has been that learning, teaching, assessing, and curriculum design or building has been conducted remotely. It has been self-centered. It has been focused on regulating the learner, putting them into a box, the person who is to experience this thing called curricula, resigning them to a mere afterthought. There's no impact research necessary here. Now, UDL encourages, or Universal Design for Learning encourages, educational practitioners, regardless of their specific role in this educational process, to design curricula or a curriculum with flexible differentiation inbuilt as intrinsic. No learner can get lost in that. Now, with UDL, the curricula will become accessible using multiple flexible methods and putting them at the disposal of the learner. Now, the current practice that I mostly encounter is the practice of, I call it retrofit, refit. The textbook, the worksheet, the curriculum is designed to meet for the learner or the upper band. The professional, the teacher, must take that, refit it, retrofit it, and make it accessible to those who cannot reach that upper level. It's called differentiation. Now, I'm going to ask you to consider these two questions. What happens to the learner if the teacher is not a professionally qualified teacher and has no training in this thing called differentiation? Question number 2, what happens to the learner when the content is not designed for them? These are not unrealistic questions. Now, once universal design was accepted as good and accepted as inclusive, it had to be made tangible, it had to be made real. Now, let me come back to your journey here. Did you encounter any difficulties physically in getting here? Did you walk on a pathway? Were there cuts in the road? How did you cross the road? Quite simply, that is the product of universal design. So I would say if universal design is a paradigm for maximum inclusion in the physical sphere out there, well, can it be a paradigm or a framework for maximum inclusion in the educational sphere? I say it can be. Why? Because it can inclusively address the needs of all pupils, regardless of their background, ability, or disability. What do we have to do? We have to be like Mace the architect and view difference as an everyday occurrence in the educational process and celebrate that difference, but conduct impact research and design for it. Please take a look around this room. If there was a fire in this room, where do you go? Well, the signs to left and right here point us upwards to the emergency exit. How do you know that? Because you have access to the universal design language of buildings. Why don't we do that with education? Now, universal design for learning has as its premise, its foundation, that all education should reach as many learners at the same time and as possible. Let's return to your journey again. The physical sphere, is it open to all people, all service users, wheelchair users, mothers pushing prams, bikes? So would you ever turn to the old architecture of the past with no ramps or no access for disabled? Why do we continue with the old processes within education? Now, UDL has as its foundation and it is based quite simply on evidence, empirical evidence, on cognitive neuroscience, a science that focuses on understanding how we human beings learn. And it concludes empirically through PET scans, through MRI scans, that we learners learn differently, and there are ways to learning that are different. So UDL does not only help educators differentiate, it intrinsically inbuilds differentiation. So whether the teacher is up to speed with differentiation or not, the learner has access, just like a modern building. An able-bodied and a disabled-bodied person has access to that building. We must make the classroom the same thing. Think about modern technologies today. If you're hard of hearing, hard of sight. Within the classroom, what about automatic speaking technology, Braille in textbooks, large font size, an immediate removal of a barrier in the same way we do with buildings? Now, many trained and untrained educators are at the stage of using assistive technologies. I really, really reject that because it accepts as a premise an inflexible curriculum. And I think, just like modern buildings and products, we need to not return to the old ways. I'll ask you another question. Do you know the difference between accessing information via the internet and accessing learning via inquiry-based learning? Would you know the difference between that? Like, for instance, if I go home tonight and I want to look up and find information on the expansion of the universe, and I do that, I have access to information. But access to that information does not guarantee any kind of understanding. Why? Because I'm not a scientifically trained mind. So some kind of designed instruction must follow that. And this designed instruction must be flexible so it can meet as many learners as possible. That is universal design for learning. Now, UDL has its limitations. It will be and must always be informed by improved pedagogy, educational psychology, developments in cognitive neuroscience, etc. But ideally, UDL is designed to meet the needs of a full range of learners with sensory, motor, linguistic abilities or disabilities, or specific learning difficulties, SLDs, or even it could meet the needs of conflict areas, designed reconciliation, like the curriculum I designed and is currently on the desk of the Department of Education in Northern Ireland. So UDA will offer ways of planning and goal setting which do not confuse the ends with the means of getting to the end. And that is extremely important. UDL is not and will not always meet the needs of all pupils at all times, everywhere. However, I do claim, and it is my idea, that UDL, Universal Design for Learning, maximizes inclusion or access to information and to learning and to understanding. I conclude, therefore, by not claiming UDL as a silver bullet. It will not heal all of our educational deficiencies. However, I am saying that it will provide accessibility to as many learners with abilities or disabilities in the same classroom. Universal Design for Learning, employed with all current pedagogical good practice or best practice, can play a role in maximum differentiation without losing any learner within the process of education. I conclude, therefore, by promoting this, my idea for TED, that Universal Design for Learning is a paradigm for maximum inclusion. Thank you.